In this demo, I'm going to go over how to make 3D sculpted hair within ZBrush. So using different tools and techniques to take a sphere and sort of make volume and masses around the head. Usually what you'll find is you're either making sculpted hair for a presentation or maybe like a stylized game. The second unit would be something more akin to a AAA character where you'd have hair cards which might be generated by XGen, and then you'd have the isolated incident when you're rendering something where it would actually use different tools like XGen to render different fibers. But here we're focusing on actually sculpting like you classically would with normal clays. And it's a really good technique to know because all of those workflows that I just mentioned usually stem from this subject. So you'd get a concept, try and almost design a hairstyle, and then take it down and deviate it to the workflow of your desire. So really useful technique for understanding how to sculpt hair within ZBrush. So first I'm going to start with this demo head. Now if you press comma to bring up this window, you'll be able to find a couple of projects, and it's called Demo Head Female. So just a nice simple practice for making hair. Usually the way I like to start out is collecting loads of references, getting to understand what sort of hairstyle you're making, but also at the same time appreciating that the hair's going to look different on different face structures, etc. So potentially going on Pinterest and searching about can be a useful technique for understanding where your hair is going to be directed and how it's going to flow and how it's going to curl and things like that. So getting started, the first thing I like to do is come down to my subtools and then to append. What we're going to do is start by making a sphere, and it's going to form the basis of the head. I'm just going to use gizmos to realign it and readjust it around the cranium just to get a good shape. There we go, hair complete. Next thing I do is come down to Dynamesh, just so every time we make different changes to the shape we can update the geometry. So under Dynamesh I'm just going to toggle Dynamesh on. Now the primary purpose at this stage is to focus on the silhouettes or the hairline of the character. So I'm going to turn on symmetry by pressing X. And then I'm just going to use any tool. It's up to you. I prefer using only maybe one or two tools for this stage, but any tool to get the desired result, which would be the hairline. So everyone's got different comfortabilities with brushes. For this, I'm going to use the move brush. So I've got that hotkey, so it's at my axis. And I'm just going to move this blob around to form a slight hairline. I'm not stressing about it too much. I know it's going to change as I go along, but it's a good place to start with. The next part, I'd probably try and trim down this sculpture to the cranium a bit more because it's looking a bit like an afro. I'm going to use Trim Dynamic. So Trim Dynamic's a really useful brush in the sense that wherever I do my brush settings, it's going to take a chunk off the clay, and I can use this to move the camera around, do little strokes, and basically shape the start of the hair. So I'm trying to get it as close to the head as possible, just so I can have that starting point. If it goes into the hair for now, don't worry too much because we can just bring that back. I'm just trying to find the key shape. So any place that it does start to poke through, that's okay. I'm going to use a clay brush, and basically the clay brush is going to fill in any indentations. I'm not focused on making it nice and neat just yet because I know I'm going to smooth it over. Once that's done, I usually get quite a large brush and then hold shift and just smooth things out to get that initial shape. So if you're making short hair, obviously you've got a far shorter task than compared to the long hair, but for today I think what we're going to do is just make quite long hair. So the first thing I'd want to do is if I come into Dynamesh and then I press Control, I'm just going to recalculate the mesh so I've got the geometry that I need. Next point, we're going to use a brush called a snakehook. So when we come into the brushes section, we've got snakehook here. It's also under, if you press B, S and H, that brings up a snakehook. So the feature of a snakehook is that when you click and drag, you can bring out these these hooks or these tentacles. Really good, useful tool for making hair at this stage. But the problem is that the geometry isn't getting supported. So I think it as of 2020 or 2019, I can't remember, there's a new feature in ZBrush which is called Sculpt Pro. So when you come up here, there'll be this little icon. If it's not there, you don't have it in the most up-to-date version. But when we activate that, and we also have snakehook enabled, you'll see that the cursor turns purple. So now that when we make movements, it's generating topology as we go, and we don't have to worry about redynameshing anything or kind of like smoothing things over. So that's a really cool way of making individual strands of hair. We're not going to dive into that straight away. That's too much of a kind of like a third read or a unique piece that we do. But what we can do is use it in a way almost like a move brush, and what's going to happen is going to update our topology as we're moving. So with normal move brush, if we were sort of like bringing out volumes of hair, we'd start to find that there was this geometry stretching, and then that can be really annoying when you're concepting forms and masses. However, if you come to the snakehook, and because we have Sculpt Pro activated, and now if we use this as we would with a standard move tool, you can see that it's moving the masses, but it's also updating the geometry at the same time. So this fundamental of using Sculpt and snakehook, we're going to use that to form the main masses of the hair. So right here, I've turned off symmetry. I kind of want to make this an asymmetric haircut. Thinking about the largest forms possible, I'm just going to make some large hair and think about, with loads of small brushes and movements, sort of like clicking and let it go like this, not large ones, because that's going to draw out a massive spool. But I'm focusing on the edges of the silhouette and making primary forms. So from this, I'm just going to go ahead and make the main structure of the head. So at this stage, the primary areas I'm looking at and how I make decisions on moving things is basically looking at curvatures. So you get this from your references and studying how like the hair falls. But if you look here, just trying to follow natural curves, and also turning the perspectives a lot, like looking at it from the side and trying to achieve the same things. We want to make nice sort of curves that follow nicely, but also achieve that at most angles, so making it look good from the top, the bottom, and the side. So this is looking a bit more of like a classic haircut. Also do focus at the bottom just to make sure that it's not intersecting with the neck, and then you've got good follow-ons and different shapes at different points. Just remember, at this stage, we're not necessarily thinking about individual strands of hair, but more how they're going to look when they're all clumped together. So in my head, I'm imagining where this hair is going to flow. I'm imagining where it's potentially going to split, and how that's going to be brought together. If at any point you want to bring out a feature, this is sort of like a 3D concepting stage. So maybe I'd like some more hair coming out from this side. Quite simply, what I can do is, get the snakehook with that tool and then start dragging out more hair. So the entire sculpt is really malleable once we've got it at this stage, and it's just about getting from a distance and seeing how the hair can be formed. If you're making a game character, I wouldn't go so artistic like this. I wouldn't kind of have it flowing around everywhere, but just for the sake of showing how to sculpt hair, I'm going to do a demonstration of how you can kind of use these tools. So say I'm happy with the overall look from a distance in the silhouettes, we can start thinking about refining the clumps that are there. So for example, when I was making this silhouette, I could imagine that a piece of hair was going to be leading from the front and then sort of like wisping over and coming all the way down. So if you wanted to define something like that, I suggest using the clay tubes brush and then just using small feathers at a large size, and then kind of following the forms that you would have made previously. I'd leave them kind of rough and dirty at the moment, not really focusing on small brushes like that for hair, but more larger clumps. At this stage, we're thinking about now splitting this mass into smaller sections or layers of hair. So maybe if I decided that she's going to have a bit of a parting, so maybe half of her hair is going to go to the right side and then some to the left side, then what I can also use is a Dam standard, so Damien standard brush, and then I can just draw that in. So once that's drawn in and I like how it looks, I might be able to reposition it with a move brush just to get more feeling. So with any sort of sculpting task, it's about inserting landmarks and shapes and then refining it with the move, and then coming in, putting in more landmarks and shapes, and then coming back and repositioning it. So right now I want a bit more of an indication of where hair is getting directed from the head, so where it's flowing. So I'm just going to use clay tubes, and I'm going to use quite a large brush, and I'm going to brush in the direction where the hair's starting from and then going to be leading off to. I don't have to finish it all the way down, because what I'm going to do is just going to get a very large brush and then smooth this all away so I can barely see it, but there is a bit of a visual representation that it's going to go in that direction. So I'm just going to do the same side and basically refine some of these shapes so I can see what they look like. So right here what I'm doing is just getting an idea of the direction and flow, and then using quite a large brush. So what you'll find is the nature of this brush is that it's quite harsh on the edges, so if I do make quite a large indentation like this, what it's going to do is it's going to create this natural splitting, which I can then focus on later and refine depending on how it looks. So it's all about accidentally making these edges which you can later come back and refine. So once we've got basically the high concept and the shape and the general direction of the hair that we want, it's now about splitting up this hair into individual components so they can be managed and affected by differently. So say for example I was moving and splitting parts of the hair, it's going to be difficult because when I make movements here it's going to adjust onto the left side and the right side. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to isolate the hair, so just by clicking solo, and then you see we've got this lovely sort of clay happening. I'm then going to come to masking, and then with the mask selected I'm going to change the brush and then change it to mask lasso. So by default you probably have it to mask pen. So selecting mask lasso, I can hold control and then just basically draw out a section, and for my haircut here I'm finding a natural split down the center. So that's just splitting this volume of hair that I'm going to be using, and the other side. Maybe I can later split this into two separate pieces as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down with this mask selected, come to split, and then split to mask points, and that's basically going to split in two. I'm left with this hole, but because it's a Dynamesh, it's already Dynameshed, I can hold control, just draw a shape on the outside, let go, and it's going to reform and reclose up these holes. So I just want to do that with the other side. Re-Dynamesh. Now when I come out and unhide them, I've now got two separate pieces. So this is the direction that it's going to be heading in, is we're just going to start splitting pieces and also adding them later. If you look and we now come and start to edit this part, we can have really defined splits. And that's where the look of the hair starts to come out. So if I press Alt and click, it's going to click onto individual subtools. So now I can come in and start to refine it. So my next goal is just to make some interesting splits and shapes and layers using this technique. So just following that. So at any point in this stage, you can start to add in little indicators and landmarks. So for example, here is a bit more transparent in which way we're taking it and what secondary clumps are going to basically pop up, whereas this one's quite a basic one. So what I might want to do is get something like a dam standard and then just draw indication lines, and that's going to help my eye when it comes to moving the rest of this clay. So for example, I can now start to generate a little bit of a secondary split by coming to the snake hook and then just trying to adapt these and work out how these are going to split up even further. I could even supported some of these lines with clay tubes, so just bulking up different sections. So when we're looking at the silhouette, it's a little bit more interesting than just like a flat surface. Again, at every stage, I suggest just smoothing it out, because we don't want to be looking at details and get bogged down by the details. We just want to look at masses and silhouettes. So here I'm really focusing on the clumps and getting more into the secondary form. So it's introducing more of the dam standards and the clay and a little bit less of the move brush. So basically we've got 1, 2, 3 sections here, and then I'm just splitting them up manually. I wouldn't suggest going too far with the separate subtools. Only start to separate them as subtools when it becomes a bit unmanageable. So for example, this little feature here, I might want to split that off separately, so that when I'm working on this sort of fringe piece that comes around the back of the ear, I'm not going to accidentally be breaking this section. So you might want to think about, masking that off and splitting it like this. So we could just come with control, mask it, and then come to split mask points, and then we're left with our re-dynameshed hair basically. Just make sure Dynamesh is on. So the reason we don't want to put massive detail is because every time we Dynamesh, we're going to lose that quality. But to a certain extent, that's quite nice, because it keeps you on track with the main purpose, which is the overall shapes. But you can always put in further resolution here by just turning up and pressing Dynamesh. A cool way to do the hair at points is, once you've got the dam standard, what you can do is put in somewhat of a split and then support that with the opposite of a dam standard, which is holding Alt, and it's basically going to give you this nice sharp transition. That's a really cool way of splitting parts of the hair. So when it comes to sculpting hair, you're not thinking about sculpting individual strands, but it's more about sculpting separations. So when we're doing this sort of this direction and the form, our main purpose is to split parts of the hair, not necessarily draw them individually, because that can come at a later date. So for example, if I wanted to make an interesting split here, all that I do is maybe put a dam standard following in the general direction, and then maybe using the opposite of a dam standard to create like a layer, and then bulking that up with clay tubes just to give it some more mass. So at this stage I've got a general sense of the rhythm of the hair. So lots of damn standard streaks that are kind of splitting off these main sections that we made into individual pieces. At the top a bit more detail when it comes to hair, and it kind of like splitting off at points with a very short damn standard, but then also rejoining back onto itself. So this is where clay tubes have kind of like converged and then turned into one giant mass. So when you're making hair, that's an observation that you want to make, and then start having clumps of hair joining each other and then at some point splitting off. So for example, maybe where the hair is catching a bit of wind, I can insert just a very small dam standard that starts and finishes here to here, and then that gives the indication that the hair strands are kind of like opening up. And you can see I've done the same on the inside. So this is just an indication that the hair is sort of like fanning out. Whereas if you've got sort of more flat parts of the hair which are being stretched down on the head, you just want some basic flat pieces that can be smoothed out and flattened with maybe one or two parts depending on what style of hair it is. So next bit, what I'm going to do is just what I'll call moving on to the secondary forms and secondary silhouettes. So it's just about tightening these up so the tips don't look like tentacles, they more look like strands of hair. A really useful tool for this is something called the pinch tool. So whenever you come to the ends, selecting a brush called pinch, and then what I suggest doing is turning off Sculptress Pro, because we want to keep all the information that we've had. We just want to clump bits of clay together. So if I come and brush down in the direction of the hair, it's going to pinch the ends together, and that's going to give like a nice hair effect visual. It's really great for getting rid of like the blobby bits that were created when we were doing the initial snake hooks. Another trick we can use is making individual hair strands and then starting to move and manipulate them back onto the asset. So if I come to append and basically bringing another sphere, just like how we started the hair, only this time I'm going to kind of make it a bit smaller, turn it into a dynamesh down here, reuse the snakehook technique, so BSH for snakehook. I'm then going to basically drag out an individual hair. So maybe something that I can give some shape to. I can make numerous amounts of these and maybe even put like intricate details. So when it comes to making an individual strand like this, maybe I can put some dam standard forms in there, sort of like some details, just to make sure. You do want to focus a bit of time on this, because especially if it's being duplicated, you do want to spend some time on it. So just making sure that the tips are nice and it's not going to cause any issues. But basically once we've got that, we can use duplication. So I'm just going to duplicate that individual strand and then use the gizmo. So with the gizmo I can alt click and then reposition the pivot point while holding this corner piece onto around about where I want the hair to start, and then because it is a duplicated piece I can bring it off and then start to rotate and position it into places that I like. So maybe I want to cover up the split that's happening here. I'm just going to make the hair strand smaller or give it some additional layers, you know, so it's not just starting and finishing at the end. And because this is quite a large clump, it's got that nice form. So I'm going to roughly position it here. Doesn't have to be perfect, because what I'm now going to do is I'm going to use the move brush and then start to reposition that back into place. And I can be quite aggressive with this, so I can start bringing out the hair and, you know, seating it back onto the sculpt. What I would suggest is this hair can get out of hand. So like if you're adding loads of clumps and hair strands, it's going to naturally bulk out. So at some points what you might want to do is, after you've placed a hair strand like this, is go underneath and just give a little push back onto the head, because you know, people's hairs aren't that thick. So once I've done that, I can now start to push it in and further refine it, even make the silhouette maybe a bit more complicated by drawing pieces out. But you can start to see with this workflow how you can get like some basic shapes and then add more complexity and more complexity onto it. So even with this piece, I can now duplicate it again and then reposition it in a different location and maybe give it a different shape off to the side. So I'm going to reshape it here just so I can see it. And now I'm going to place it more to the front of the head. If you hold Alt with the gizmo selected, you can sort of draw out this manipulator, and I finish and point at the end of the hair, and that gives me like a nice straight line that I can use the gizmo with. So just going to position it near the front. You know, even what you could do is make this really small and then have it as more of like a defined feature, you know, like the flick of a hair. With this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it lead naturally into the first sculpt I did. So just connecting it all back into the hair and making clumps. At some point I maybe even want to replace this piece, so I could just delete that because we separated it earlier, and now I can focus on making something that's a bit more refined. So I'm just going to do that across the hair to a certain extent till we move on to the next tool. So before I was talking about opening and closing parts of the head, basically depending on how much like air is being lifted or how flat it's being flushed against each other. You can do that with the subtools. So what you might want to do is have it naturally originate from the same sort of direction, have it sort of follow the hair that you originally made, and then what you can do is have it separate off ever so slightly, and then have it split off into another section. So it depends how crazy you want the hair to be. Maybe you want this to go back into the hair flow, and then that gives like a nice separation. So you can see how you can get, through duplication and using multiple subtools, you can get all these transitions, these really nice sharp transitions that would otherwise be quite hard to sculpt manually with like a dynamic brush and things like that. So use the duplications to your advantage, and then all the sculpting that we did was really to focus on the overall shapes and primary forms. So another technique that I like to use is, say we've got this individual piece of hair, so I can select that. This is how it looks as a separate subtool. What I can do is I can just duplicate that. Now I've got two that are separated on top of each other. When I come to moving the brush, I can just move one section, and now what I've got is a strand of hair that starts in the same place and finishes in the same place. So what's happening here is the hair's just splitting off, and that can be like a really cool effect. So that's a cool technique, but I would leave that towards the end just to not make things so complicated, but that tool is always to your disposal. For this example, I'm just going to kind of put it back into the hair, maybe create a bit more splitting and volume here that I otherwise wouldn't get with my brush. So whenever we have a strand of hair that's a little bit too long and we want to sort of shorten it, because we've got Sculptress Pro activated, I can just hold shift and almost delete the edges because it's going to infinitely smooth back into itself. So that's a nice way of cutting the hair up. So just at this stage, I'm thinking about, I'm not too fussed with the individual pieces here because it would end up being a really long demo, but I'm just going to make the main features of the character, the things that sort of like define her. So I'm just going to finish up by making some bangs and then do another technique which is similar to this. So the final technique I'm going to show is a really cool and quick way of making these interesting shapes. So similar to how we did these hair strands, I'm going to come to append and then select a 3D cylinder this time. So if I bring the cylinder off to the side and then turn it off, turn it to Dynamesh, I'm then going to basically reduce it in size to somewhat of a hair strand, and now I'm going to smooth it over. So once I smooth it over, doesn't matter sort of like the edges that get deleted a bit. I'm then going to get Dam Standard and just the standard brush, and then generate these lines, just random bits of information, doesn't matter how accurate they are just yet, and also the standard brush just to create what could be considered like individual hair strands, but more clumps. So something like this. Once I've put all that sort of like random noise and generation in, I can come to the move brush, and under the move brush there's a cog up here which gives us some deformation options. We're going to make use of that by using twist deformers and curve deformers. So, but the first thing I want to do is, because we've made these strands, if I come to the gizmo and then sort of increase the size, from the strands we made, you can see that they stretch out and give this sort of like hair effect. So you could use this for a tool and just sort of like place it on the hair for individual clumps. But right now I'm going to use the gizmo. So with the gizmo selected, if I hold Alt, and then I can just draw out the center, and then take it from the side. If I click this icons, settings option, I can come to twist. So once I click twist, it puts the hair into this box. Now if I take these little triangle shapes and then click and drag them, it's going to twist the hair. So I twist the hair as much as you wanted, depending on how much flow you want. So I can twist the bottom as well. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to click the cogs icon again and then just come back to the gizmo selected here. I can also just press accept, so it's going to accept the deformation I made. At this point, I'm basically going to get the pinch tool, the one we used earlier, and I'm going to turn off the sculptress mode because I don't want it to change the topology. And then I'm just going to feather it down and sort of create a taper off and maybe smooth it in parts. I'm also going to use the move brush to sort of just give it a bit of form and structure. So what you can see happening in here is we can use this as the tool to make some quite major looks of hair and clumps of hair. So I'm going to keep that because I might want to use it later, and I'm just going to duplicate it, and then just like we had with this strand of hair, I'm going to move it to the side. I want all this information to pretty much replace the sculpting concept that I did here, just so I can get a bit more information and refinement out of it. So I'm also going to use another tool, again in the customize cog section, and this time going to use something called bend curve. So what bend curve does is it brings up these options. It might be aligned and it might not be aligned, but what we want is dots leading all the way from the top to the bottom. So the way you can change that is if you come to the red section and start to scroll back and forth, this red little cone, I'm going to switch it until my starting point is up here, my end point's down there. You'll just see it as 2 dots. So once that's happened, I can then come to the end cone here, which is like an orange one. And basically, once I click and drag, it's going to increase the amount of dots along that axis, or the resolution. So I'm going to start with a low resolution. Now, once that's in place, what I can do is I can now click and drag these points and basically use them as a curve tool to place my hair in certain places. So what I'm going to do is, probably what you can see is happening, is sort of try and follow the original sculpt that I made. So it can be as rough as possible because we can come back later and just use normal sculpting to change it. But I'm going to try and abide a little bit by the sculpting forms that we did. If you want to refine that even further, once you've come in and put this in, what we can do is add some more resolution, and then you can change them at different increments. But I don't really suggest that for hair. What I do is just come out of the cog mode, accept that, and then use the move tool to move it in the way that we want using a large move brush. So when I solo it, that's the one we're working with, and now I can just make little movements to shape the hair the way that I want. It doesn't need to be super accurate. For this, I just want it to feed back in to the forms that we already did and just give it a bit more resolution. So when it comes to sculpting hair and refining it even further, we can use that technique to get loads of cool streak information. We can start to clump it back onto the original first draft mesh that we did, and then we can start to smooth it potentially back onto the mesh just so it looks decent. So overall what you do, I won't finish it off, but you'd use those techniques in conjunction. So starting with a sphere and then splitting up into large form components, creating individual sort of strands that we can then put on top of the hair that we already made. So this would be more like the secondary forms. And then if we want to put extra details in, we can use this technique to make hair clumps and then try and place them within the hair that we already made. So if you did want to replace this piece, all we'd have to do is select on the original mesh and then just either smooth it out or use the trim brush to kind of like hide it back into the original hair. So we keep the hair shape that we originally intended, but it's just getting replaced by sort of like more high quality hair. I'm just going to pinch this off. So yeah, rinse and repeat, and once you go through this process and a little bit of practice, because you won't get it first time, you'll have a set of sculptable hair that you can use for your game characters.